Hello guys, it's finally finished. I finally completed the 1/24th scale Spitfire from Airfix. I think my last update on this was in February, and my first video I started building this kit back in November, so it's been a long time. But it's done now, so in this video I'm going to show you the final few steps to get it complete. In the last video we left the Spitfire ready for painting, so my first job was to give everything a coat of primer, and then a light mottled coat of XF69 NATO black, which should hopefully give some variation to the top coat. You might notice here that I haven't painted the top engine panel or the side panels. That's simply because at this stage I'm using those as masks. I've put them in place and I've taped them in place to stop me getting any excess paint on the engine. But of course, because they've got masking tape all over them to hold them in place, there's no point in me painting them now. I'll need to do that later. Talking of those engine panels, it's not really possible to have them in place and have the full engine built up inside. I don't think it's supposed to be, because Airfix give you a simplified version of the engine to build if you want to put the panels in place. Now 4 out of 5 of the schemes in the box are the Day Fighter scheme, which is the ocean grey and dark green over medium sea grey. The only exception to that is this dark earth and middle stone, which is a British scheme but with American markings. The scheme I'm going for is this one here, scheme B in the box. I started by putting down the ocean grey colour, and for this I really like AK's real colour paints. Maybe I've just fallen for the marketing, but I do think they're a really close match compared to other ranges. They're also quite thick paints in the bottle as well, so they need a bit more thinning, but it does mean that one bottle goes a little bit further. So you'll notice here I've painted the grey, but not everywhere. I sort of started out by trying to avoid the green areas, and then I decided not to, but then I left some of the areas not painted ready for the green. So a bit of a mix and match there. Of course that means the green will take on slightly different tones depending whether it's going over the grey or the black, but that shouldn't be a problem. My favourite new tool for masking things like this is this Tamiya masking sheet. So much easier to work with than masking tape. I simply cut a piece roughly to size, sketch on the scheme with a pencil. Now I am doing a rough scheme here, I'm not trying to match every individual little contour and so on. I could photocopy and enlarge the kit painting scheme, but I just sort of eyeballed it instead. I know there's some debate about whether this should be a hard or soft edge. I think that even at 1/24 scale, a hard edge is fine. And then just cut it out. I try to conserve the Tamiya masking sheet because it's not cheap, by cutting the curves from it and then filling the gaps with regular masking tape. And after quite a lot of time, we have a mostly completely masked Spitfire. The area around the top of the engine did cause me a bit of confusion. If we look at the right hand side here, the starboard side, you can see in front of the cockpit we've got a solid area of green, then some grey, slightly smaller, and then a huge area of green again, starting just in front of the join for the engine panel. However, if we flip to the top instruction here, you can see that that grey area comes back way past that fueling point, right towards the cockpit, which it doesn't do on the side view. So I had to do a little bit of interpretation there. Similarly, if we look on the top view here, the green sort of falls out of view there, roughly as it meets that panel line for the engine cover. But if we go to the port side view, we can see that actually it's nowhere near that and hasn't been. Not a major issue, just as long as you don't get confused. I sprayed the RAF dark green on top and took the opportunity to spray the medium sea grey on the underside. Then it was time to remove the masking, which generally worked really well. I also masked the band near the tail and painted it with AK Real Colours Sky. and with the majority of the painting done, I could finally remove all that masking from around the cockpit to see all that hard work and detail again. As you can see, I put all of the weapon and ammunition bay doors in to act as a mask during the painting process. And I can also remove the engine panels, which I used as a mask, and give them the same paint treatment, so the black base coat and then the grey and the green. The yellow stripes on the leading edges of the wings were also masked and painted. As were the yellow tips of the propeller blades. The design here makes it really easy to paint things separately and just slot the blades in at the end. The undercarriage legs were painted with Vallejo metal colour. This is their aluminium. They've got a nice key section here to make sure you get them in the right way. And you do have to make sure they go all the way in, because that second sort of, that tip of that triangle there must hook up to that pin to provide strength. It is quite a tight fit. I did have to sand it a little bit to get some of the paint off. But yes, you've got to make sure it goes in. Next up was the decals. So of course we've got one sheet for the stencil data, which is common between all variants. And then we've got one sheet for each camo scheme, or marking scheme. At this stage I gave the entire Spitfire a coat of VMS gloss varnish, and I started with the stencil data. I was a bit reticent about putting these decals down because there's so much surface detail on the Spitfire, there's so many panel lines, there's so many rivets, that I was really worried about how they go down. Not to mention the fact that we've got removable weapons bay doors with decals that go over them. Large decals at that, because it's the roundels. However, I was really pleased to see that they went straight down, and with a little bit of Tamiya mark fit, they took to the surface really, really well. Straight into the panel line, straight into the rivet detail. They really do look like they're painted on in most cases. Excellent job on the decals there. The serial numbers and the codes and the roundels are always a difficult one for me. Because of course the letters and the roundels are all separate decals, you've got to be careful about getting them straight and level, but also putting the first one in the right place so that there's still space for the other ones, and getting the spacing consistent as well. Luckily Airfix did a really good job with their instructions, and if you follow the placement there, you can't really go too far wrong. Note that the letter here is supposed to go over that serial number. And again, a bit of burnishing with a cotton bud and a bit of mark fit, and it went down very well. Even here, where with the roundels on a slightly curved surface, curved in more than one dimension as well, you can see there's a bit of a wrinkle here in the roundel, but with some mark fit, push it down, and then even when you've got wrinkles like that, you can just slowly work them out over time, and they will disappear. This is one of the decals which worried me because it goes over this bump in the underside of the wing, and it goes over that hole which is an ejection port for the machine gun, I think. So not really the best territory for a decal, but again it went down perfectly. It does look like it's going wrong at first, it goes all wrinkly, but mark fit, burnishing with a cotton bud, bit more mark fit, bit more burnishing, and it went down perfectly. I decided to use the decals for the gun port covers rather than paint them on, because I figured that was a bit more realistic. You know, they are covers over the gun part that get broken when the guns are first fired, rather than actually being painted onto the aircraft. It does note in the decal callouts that this may have been a red Canadian maple leaf, or it may have been a green one. I went for the red one. And then the big test, all of the weapon bay doors back in, even though they're going to be off on the final model, so that I can put down the huge round door here. That gun bay door nearest to us is not a bad fit. It's simply that I built up the machine gun inside, and therefore according to the instructions you're not actually supposed to fit that door, but I'm fitting it again as a kind of mask at the moment. I suppose the debate here is whether to cut the roundels first, before you apply them, or to apply them and then cut them. I applied them first, and then took a brand new scalpel blade and very carefully cut along the lines. This was quite nerve-wracking. But you can see here just how well that roundel's gone down. That decal has gone right into all of those rivet points there. And if I do this carefully enough, it should mean that that piece will come out and it will still have the roundel on it in a usable form. There we go. Nice. One of the reasons I selected this variant was because we have a nice piece of nose art here. We don't often see nose art on Spitfires, but this one has pop-eye. Even though I won't be using the engine cover, I think I can always have it sort of laying nearby, so it's important to get this down. Next up, the canopy glass. Never my favourite part, to be honest. Airfix say here in the instructions that they give us two versions of the canopy. One is slightly inaccurate, it doesn't have quite the bulge that it should do, but it doesn't have a seam line. Or they give us a version with a seam line, which has got the more accurate shape. To be quite honest with you, I couldn't really tell the difference. I'm sure that Spitfire aficionados will be able to, but there's really not much in it. So I went for the slightly inaccurate version without the seam line, not least of which because I can't find my Tamiya polishing compound. And of course I can always keep the other one and change it later, it's not like it's an internal part or anything. Since this scale is nice and big, I decided to use a single piece of tape to cover the glass points, and then very carefully with a sharp blade cut around the edge. Better to make several gentle cuts than one heavy one. And then remove the excess tape, like so. And that should give us a more or less perfect mask. However, I didn't think of that technique until after I had masked the main canopy. The thing to remember with this cockpit glass is that I need to paint it twice. I need to paint the bottom layer in the interior green colour, so that's visible from the inside, and then on top of that I need to paint the camouflage RAF green colour, the regular green. Rather than painting once on the inside, once on the outside, I just painted those two paints in layers. I figured that was easier because there's nothing to guide the masking tape on the inside of the part, and then you've got the additional difficulty of getting the masks lined up with each other inside and out. So here is the part all masked up and painted. I was ready to pull the masking tape off at this point, and then I remembered, before I do, I need to matte coat it. Otherwise the glossy paint will look slightly different to the paint on the rest of the Spitfire. And of course if you matte coat the clear part without the masking, that's a bad idea. And there we go, there is our completed canopy part. The next step was to give everything a panel line wash. For this I decided to use this pre-made panel line wash mixture. Before I put this down I gave the entire Spitfire a coat of matte varnish. I know that gloss varnishes or semi-gloss varnishes are recommended to help with the flow of oil paints and enamels, But to be honest, I quite like the way they work on a matte varnish because they slightly seep into the paintwork, and you can still blend them, but it just adds a little bit of sort of a slightly dirtier effect to them. So it takes care of some of the weathering for you, I think. Now of course there are hundreds and hundreds of rivets on this Spitfire wing. I did consider doing the panel line wash in all of them, but I tried it on a small section and it essentially looked like there were just big thick black lines running down the length of the wing. So instead I limited the panel line wash to the panel lines themselves and the larger rivets. I felt that gave a nice balance between accentuating the detail and not looking overdone. As always, you can use a brush or a cotton bud dampened in white spirit to clean up any excess. Here I'm doing a combination of trying to remove the excess and blend it into the surface. So I'm trying to keep my brush strokes in the direction of the airflow over the wing or over the fuselage. I found the easiest way to do this was to apply the panel line wash to 1 or 2 sections at a time, go back and clean those up, then apply it to 2 more sections, clean those up, and so on. The wingtip lights are a little unusual in that the clear parts are larger than the light bulb itself, or the light covering itself, so some of that part needs to be painted in the camouflage colour with just the light picked out. So here I am painting the covers in the transparent green and transparent red colours, and then I brush painted the camouflage on top. This belly panel was quite a difficult fit, and as I pushed it into place you can see the engine frame there in green starting to bend. There are some small nubs on the bottom of that piece which are decals, they're supposed to be the fasteners, but they just caught in slightly the wrong place, so in the end I snipped them off so that that belly panel would fit. One of the final parts of the build was something that I've been avoiding for a while, which is the exhausts. They're made of these 2 parts here at the end, and despite the best will in the world, it does leave a bit of a seam line, a bit of a gap. This is one of the worst examples, but that needs to be sanded and removed basically. Once I'd removed all of those, the exhausts were given a coat of Tamiya XF84, which is dark iron. I wanted a clean look, so I didn't do anything else to them. Those exhausts fit cleanly into the slots in the engine. You could probably get away without gluing them, but of course I'm not going to be taking them out, so I glued them in place. Then there were just a couple of final steps, so putting the door in place and using some of this lycra rigging for an aerial wire. The canopy was fixed in place with some PVA glue, and then my Spitfire was finally ready. So there we go guys, that was my 1/24th scale Spitfire Mk IX from Airfix. After a long time of building it. What are we in now? June, and I started this in November. So a long project, really fun project. I only worked on it when I felt like it, but I always enjoyed working on it. Everything from building up the detail there in the cockpit, to adding the decals, a really well designed kit from Airfix. I don't think I had any major complaints whatsoever. I like the fact that both the gun bays, the ammunition bays and the engine can be built detailed, or they can be built covered up as well. And in fact, though I have built the engine detailed, I can still just about squeeze on those engine panels for display like that as well. There's nothing to keep them on there, there's no fasteners or anything. I suppose I could add some micro magnets or something, but overall, really top-notch kit. I hope that Airfix do something similar with a Hurricane, or possibly even just with a different mark of Spitfire. A Mark I would be really nice, wouldn't it, in that dark earth and dark green camo scheme. But yeah, overall, top-notch kit, really enjoyable. And if you haven't bought one yet, but you're still thinking about it, I would definitely recommend it. I'd also like to say thank you to all of you for watching, and if you've been watching this series since November, well, thank you for sticking with me. It was a long process. Hopefully you enjoyed the videos and the final result. I've got a few more projects creeping towards the finish line, so stay tuned for those, and until next time, have fun modelling.